Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of this book, A Century of Car Aerodynamics, the Science and Art of Cars and Airflow. What I want to do in today's video is look at an incredible aerodynamics battle that was fought in the 1920s. Yes, basically 100 years ago, and it was for the outright land speed record. Let's take a look at two cars and then let's look at their aerodynamics. So this is the first of the two cars. It's the 1927 Sunbeam land speed race car. It was actually dubbed Mystery, but most people called it the 1,000 horsepower Sunbeam because of the amount of power it had, obviously. And it was really one of the first streamlined cars. And if you think that's an exaggeration, well, let's have a look at it. Notice how the bodywork extends the full width of the car, covering the wheels. There aren't separate fenders or guards. And you can see that here and here, and that was really unusual, in fact basically unknown. In fact, some nasty people called the car the Slug because of its inverted bathtub shape. Notice also how you can see here the air entrance duct for the radiator. It is a duct. Now it's got sharp edges and it would be better if those were rounded from a point of view of drag, but to have even a ducted radiator at all was quite amazing. And if we look at the back of the car, this was photographed by me in a UK museum, we can see that the tail declines in height, leading to a relatively small wake. It was an extremely interesting low drag car. We'll talk about drag figures in just a moment, but even just looking at those photos, you can see that it would be quite low in drag. And if we look in more detail, here's the base of the car, the area in contact with the wake, and what can't be seen is underneath here there's actually a diffuser. The bottom of the car slopes upwards, of course a smooth bottom, and you can see the fairing behind the driver's head. You can see how smooth the car is, but you can also see that the wheels are just exposed spokes, which would be quite draggy. So pretty good. It's startlingly good for the 1920s, but we can still see how some improvements could be made. Here's the car, firstly on the dyno. Yes, it did run on a dyno, a hub dyno we'd call it these days. And here it is in the US, about to run on the beach. Top speed, 327.97 kilometers an hour. 328 kilometers an hour to round it off, 204 miles an hour. The very first car ever in the history of the world to exceed 200 miles per hour. An amazing car driven by Seagrave. Now, that's pretty good. But let's look at the next car that came along and was also driven by Seagrave and broke the record. It was the 1929 Golden Aero, and even at a glance I think you can see it looks dramatically different from the Sunbeam that we saw a moment ago. Look at that intricate shape. Now notice also the wheels are now enclosed with discs for low drag. Notice the fairing that goes between the wheels. But notice here how the bodywork is wrapped around the shape of the engine really tightly. It was a W engine, so one vertical cylinder bank and then two cylinder banks either side. And you can see that the engine cover really wraps around tightly. And also you can see here there's open air down there and down there. So a dramatically different approach to the Sunbeam that we saw a moment ago. Here it is running on the beach. Again, driven by Seagrave, 372 kilometers an hour. So it went faster, 231 miles an hour. Now, the aerodynamic approach of those two cars is dramatically different. And for the first time in my book, the first time I've ever seen the data actually revealed, I and an expert aerodynamicist who was working with me, Jeff Howe, we did a lot of calculations based on drag coefficients, loads and so on, and actually came up with some really interesting data, and that's shown here. So look firstly at Sunbeam. And we can see that, there it is, we can see it's the all-in enveloping bodywork. It has a frontal projected area of 20.8 square feet. So that's if we were looking straight onto the front of the car from a distance, say with a telephoto lens, how big is the area directly facing us, including the tyres, the bits of the tyres that we can see, and the area is 20.8 square feet. The drag coefficient, which is how slippery is the bodywork of the car, drag coefficient, I think revealed for the very first time, 0.26. Now, the total drag of the car is those two figures multiplied by each other. And we can do area in square feet or square metres. I've chosen to leave it in the original units here of square feet. And we have a CDA. That's the total drag that's experienced by the car of 5.41. I haven't put units on it, but it's 5.41 square feet. Okay, now that's nice. But what about Golden Arrow? Now, look at how much smaller the projected frontal area is. It's only 11.8 square feet, not quite half, but getting very close to that. And if you look at the shape and remember all those gaps, you can see that the frontal area, the square centimetres, square inches that we see when we look straight on, would be much, much lower. But look at the drag coefficient, 0.38, massive. But remember, it's those two figures multiplied by each other that gives the total drag, and the total drag of the Golden Arrow was actually less. So the designer has written some fascinating papers on both cars. It's covered in detail in my book. The designer said, okay, I'm prepared to go for a worse CD, a dramatically worse CD, if I can get that frontal area way, way down. And remember, Golden Arrow actually had a little bit less power than Sunbeam, and yet it still went faster. If we look again at those cars, we can see slippery shape, but big frontal area. And here we can see nowhere near as slippery a shape, but a much, much smaller frontal area. And looking at this again, we can see all the wetted area. Now, the wetted area is the area past which air is flowing. As if it was immersed in water, what would be the area that was wet? And we can see this has got massive wetted area here, all the way along here, all the way along here, all the way in there. Whereas on the other hand, this car, Sunbeam, has only the outer bodywork basically wetted, and of course underneath. Now, when you're talking about really low drag shapes, wetted area, the friction of the air, if you like, sliding past the bodywork really starts to add up. And that's one reason that this car here, the Golden Arrow, had such a high drag coefficient, but it didn't matter because its frontal area was so much lower. Two absolutely fascinating cars. They're covered in detail in my book, A Century of Car Aerodynamics, The Science and Art of Cars and Airflow. That book's available from Amazon in every country, and it's just full of really, really interesting cars like the two we just saw. Thank you.